Welcome to the Springfield Women in Science Entrepreneurship and Research event. I'm Dina Ladd, the Executive Director of the Missouri Cures Education Foundation, and our mission is to promote and protect all medical research in the state of Missouri. 7 years ago, Missouri Cures started the WISER events around the state to bring together women to share their experiences and network. And even though we can't all be together today to share a cup of coffee, I'm very excited to think about our virtual events. We're hoping that not only do we have women from Springfield on the event today, but perhaps women from St. Louis, Kansas City, and Columbia. And I'd like to invite you to join all of our events, WISER events this year. So please go to MissouriCures.org to find information about the upcoming events in Kansas City, Columbia, and St. Louis. We also just launched our podcast, WISER Conversations, where I have the absolute pleasure to interview amazing women to hear about their lives and their careers. And speaking about amazing women, today our panel is amazing, and they're going to share with you professional development experiences. And I really appreciate their time that they're taking today to participate in this event. I live in St. Louis along with our outreach director, Ellie Hayes, and we cannot do these events around the state without great partners such as Rosie. So now I would like to turn the mic over to one of our partners, Rachel Anderson, who is the director of the E-Factory. Rachel?
Thank you, Dina. Well, we are really excited for Springfield to kind of kick off these the series of virtual WISER events and represent hopefully well. And so we started Rosie in 2016 with initial assistance from the Women's Foundation based out of Kansas City. And Paige Oxendine and I really started this to help be an advocate and mentorship network for women. So we noticed that a lot of times it was the same few women that were serving on, all the boards in town. So they were tired and needed someone else to take over. And then also a lot of times, people wanted to include women, but didn't know where to turn, that had either gone through a board training program or looking for suggestions of women to serve because they, had banking experience and lived in the city limits. So simple things like that sometimes aren't always so simple if you don't have a network already established to refer women. And so we really created a database for Rosie. Membership is free of charge. We encourage you to join us if you are not already a member. Our website is rosiesgf.com, and we also have a closed Facebook group, so you can just search for Rosie SGF. Feel free to share, board opportunities if you're looking for speakers or panelists. We do quarterly events, and so sometimes they're in person, sometimes they're virtual, just like this. But proud to say we have over 1,000 members, and some of the things that we've been able to accomplish since we started, in addition to just membership, but we've made help assist in over 40 board placements. So whether that's city, county, state level, we've also launched an equal pay pledge a few years ago and had over 100 organizations in our community sign on to that. So I think that that's really important work. And then also a lot of what we do and what we're most proud of is sometimes behind the scenes. So you might not always see a Rosie logo associated with everything that we do, but we really want to help make sure that women are represented in terms of boards, speakers, interviews, et cetera, et cetera. And so if we can ever be of assistance to you, please reach out. Again, website rosiesgf.com. And thanks to Dina and Ellie for the continued partnership, and we're really looking forward to today's discussion. And Karen, I'll turn it over to you for introductions.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Karen Shannon, happy to be the facilitator for this morning's WISER event. I'm going to introduce our three panelists and then let them share a little bit about themselves before we dig into our conversation. So our first panelist this morning is Bridget Dirk. She's the Vice President of Programs at the Community Foundation of the Ozarks. Bridget, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm delighted to be part of this. I feel like this is an honor I don't necessarily deserve, but I'm glad to join these panelists. As Karen said, I'm the Vice President of Programs at the Community Foundation, which means I'm in charge of grant making, so money leaving CFO via our discretionary funds. We have funds currently that are really focused on COVID, but in general focus a lot on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and collective impact models, which encourage agencies to work together and collaborate on their effort. So I'm delighted to be here. I have been at CFO for 14 years, so I'm a long-term employee at the same place, but have really, really enjoyed working at CFO and have been in Springfield for about 20 years now.
All right, thank you, Bridget. Our second panelist this morning is Jan Holland, and she's Vice President of Marketing and Corporate Communications for Cox Health. Good morning, Jan.
Morning. Thank you so much for having me. Again, like Bridget said, I'm really honored to be part of this panel this morning. A bit about me, as you said, I'm now going on my third year, almost fourth year with Cox Health in Marketing and Corporate Communications. I've spent a little over 30 years in marketing, brand development, graduate of Mizzou Journalism School, grew up in Springfield, but had a variety of jobs in Atlanta and St. Louis, and now back in Springfield. Worked in higher ed, food marketing consultancy, but I think I've found my home in healthcare, and I love it so much, and consider it an incredible honor to be working on the leadership team during these unprecedented times with COVID, and feel like we're working really hard to help keep the community safe, and glad to be here this morning.
All right, thank you so much, Jan. And our third panelist this morning is Amanda Tummins, partner with Hush Blackwell. Good morning, Amanda.
Good morning. I'll echo the prior two panelists in that it is a big honor to be here and speaking with this group today. I am a partner with Hush Blackwell. Which Hush Blackwell, if you're not familiar, is a law firm. I practice in the area of business transactions, anything from helping businesses get started. A lot of what I focus my time on, though, is those transactions that help keep a business running. So anything from when you're procuring your goods or you're selling them, coming up with those form contracts that help you protect yourself and keep your business running. And I've also been here for 14 years. I heard that mentioned. I came here right from University of Missouri in Columbia, Mizzou Law School. Came down and started school here. Before that, I was at Missouri State before it was Missouri State. So and I've called Springfield home ever since. So.
Great. Well, so happy that you're here with us this morning. So let's get our conversation started. And we're going to begin this morning talking about how mentors have played a role in your career. And this question is for all three of our panelists. So we'll begin with Bridget. How have mentors played a role in your career?
Well, so I've really had two significant mentors in my life that I still am in constant contact with. I had a great, somewhat informal mentorship with Gloria Galanis at Missouri State, and I have a graduate degree from there, and worked with her on a study and really found her to be, it's weird to call her a mentor because she's a friend, but she's a friend who's very wise and always gives great advice. So that has been really relevant. And she has served on the CFO board of directors and was the chair during the time that I was at CFO. And that was a great experience for me to be so connected with the board chair and to learn so much from her. But then I also had a more formalized mentorship developed via the chamber. I was on the network board, and the network is for younger people at the chamber. I'm too old to be in the network anymore, but I was in the network before just when it was first getting started, and they had a great opportunity to just connect with a mentor. So Paige was actually in charge of it at the time, and they connected me with Cliff Smart, and Cliff is the president at Missouri State University. And it has been such a meaningful experience to have him as a mentor. We did not know each other well before, or really at all, and started our mentorship relationship with breakfast at various places, Gailey's and such, and having meaningful conversations about work, and it has developed since then. So I've had sort of a formal and an informal option, and they've both been really meaningful.
Great, thank you so much. Same question to Jan.
Yes. Really, I think one of my biggest mentors was an individual, Lisa Galanti, back, oh gosh, I want to say it was over 20 years ago. She was actually my supervisor at one of the ad agencies that I worked for in Atlanta. And it wasn't a formal, you're going to be my mentor, but she was my supervisor, and I just had great admiration for the way that she led and the way that she would say, drive your desk. And she had all these different strategies and approaches that she for work in terms of efficiency and collaboration that I just so admired, and was just a sponge around her. And to this day, we stay in touch. So she has been, although we, you know, as I said, she wasn't like formally, I'm going to mentor you. She was my boss. I to this day still utilize several of the strategies that she shared with me, and I share those with the folks that I mentor and lead here at Cox Health. I also think that you can get mentorship from a wide variety of, you know, every time I'm in a project, I'm learning from someone. And so back to what, you know, Bridget said, there are formal mentorships like she's had with Cliff, and then you learn from your bosses, but you can also just learn from that group that you're involved in. So I feel like I'm always learning in any group that I raise my hand to be involved in here at Cox Health.
Great, thank you for sharing. And same question for Amanda, mentors that have played a role in your career.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the things I wanted to touch on was that you can have different mentors for different sort of roles in your career, or even your life. Just take it a step further. When I was hired here at Hush Blackwell, before it was Hush Blackwell, Virginia Fry hired me. And as I moved through my career and my life and became not only a attorney, but a wife and then a mother, she was a person that was sort of always there, and I admired how she led through those roles. And I can even remember one day that I had my kid in the emergency room the night before, and she comes in, looks at me, she goes, she asked what was going on and just said, "You need to be a mom today." And that was a really big thing for me because I work with a lot of men. We actually have more women than men in our office, or did. We're pretty evenly balanced, but I work personally with a lot of men. And so that was something nobody had ever told me. Today, you just need to be a mom. So I really took from her. That's one thing I took from her. I took so much more from Virginia, if you had the opportunity to know her. But then I have a more formal, wasn't formal, now formal mentorship role with David Agee, who I do work closely with and does the same type of work I do. But in our firm, we actually take it up one step further and have a formal sponsorship program. And that is a super meaningful relationship, and it's a super meaningful thing just to have, because a sponsor goes one step further than a mentor. And if you ever have the chance to have a sponsor or be a sponsor, take that opportunity. Because as it sounds, it's somebody willing to put their political capital or their social capital. They're investing something of themselves in your career and willing to make not just make introductions, but really step out on a limb for you. So you have to have a lot of trust in that relationship. But that's been really huge. And we've seen it around our firm that we've had women and minorities. Our firm is focused on sponsorship roles and elevating women and minorities to higher levels within the firm. And so that's been a really great thing. But it is, even before that, that relationship was there and there's a lot of trust, but I wouldn't be where I am without that relationship.
Okay, thank you for sharing, and thank you for sharing the story about Virginia. I think she has influenced so many women here in the Springfield market. Jan, did you have another comment to share?
Yeah, I was just going to say, at Cox Health, we have Cox Young Professionals, and as in the leadership role, you have the opportunity to raise your hand and mentor some of our, young leaders. And so I'm sure that Bridget and Amanda and everybody who are on this call today, it's really nice to be able to give back as well, and to look for those opportunities to then pay it forward with the new leaders. And so I really enjoyed then turning that and becoming a mentor for Cox Young Professionals. So just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. So next we're going to talk about negotiating, which is so important, whether you're negotiating your salary or negotiating the purchase of a car. The art of negotiation comes into play daily in our lives. This question goes to all three of our panelists again, and we'll start with Jan. What strategies or tactics, planning or preparation do you utilize in negotiating?
Mine always starts with research. And again, whether you're negotiating a salary in terms of a new position or the purchase of a car, they take different approaches, and you need to take into consideration who your audience is and who you're discussing negotiations with, but I always start from a place of research. I think knowledge is power, education is power, and then you're able to be able to, for example, with a new job, you want to be able to walk into that, step into that position in a way that you feel like you're excited and you feel like you've got the value, that you're being valued for the contributions that you're bringing forward. And then also the employer needs to feel the same way. And so that's where negotiation comes into play there. But I always come from a place of research, and I think it's more about data and discussion and kind of take some of the emotion out of it.
Sure. Very good. Thank you. Amanda, I know this is something you do every day in your job. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, I'll tell you, my husband hates when I negotiate for myself because I do it for a job, and so I get really complacent at home. I make him do all of that. But I'm going to echo a little bit of what Jean said. Really, it's research, and you have to level set your expectations, understand what your value is, what the other party's value is, whether it's what they're bringing to you in the job that you're being offered, it's the value of the car you're going to get, but really understand the places of value. Also understand your breaking points. What are you willing to do and what are you not willing to do? Is it a monetary threshold? Is it duties in your job? Whatever it be, sort of understand what your walk away points are. And that's the same thing I give whether we're negotiating a deal to buy something or a company. It's know your walk away points and really understand those, and don't let somebody push you too far without knowing and really understanding, nope, that's too much for me. That's too much risk. That's too much. I'm not getting enough out of it. Because nobody's going to be happy. And if you go into any sort of relationship and all negotiations end up, you might not see them again, but there's some relationship that's built there. You're going to leave that relationship not feeling well if you don't know what that is and you feel taken advantage of. And the biggest thing I can say, and this is the part that I'm really bad at doing for myself, and that I really strive to be better at when I am negotiating things such as buying a car or those kind of issues. But the depersonalization sounds really black and white, and maybe you won't, it is very personal. So why would you want to depersonalize it? And I think you can have a more objective outlook. And so that's really a key thing. Just to say, I want it because I want it, but understand why and what that means. And is it a personal thing? And if it is personal, is it a key value you hold so much that you can't live without it? But understand those so that you know what you're doing and you're not just reacting to emotion.
Right, right. And so that's one thing that I share with job applicants, know at what point that you're going to walk away from it. And so it sounds as though that is something that you feel is important as well.
I definitely think that's important. And that can change because as you go through a deal or as you go through jobs, A, your expectations can change, or B, the market changes. If it's a long process, you take buying a company, the market may change. If it takes a year or 6 months to do, depending on what kind of deal you're working on, the market may change. So your expectations may have to change based on that. But that's also updating your research and updating what's going on as you're going through the process.
Yeah, good point. Bridget, I know what you negotiate and what you focus on is probably different than what Amanda does in her law practice. Tell us a little bit about negotiating in your role.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're working in grant making, a lot of the work that we're doing is ultimately for significant community benefit. And what we end up negotiating is how we get to an end point. So we will have an agreement about this is the kind of thing that needs to change. So we'll be working in a really rural community, and we'll say, okay, access to the internet for low-income children is a big problem here. How are we going to get from here to here? And how we get there is not everyone is in agreement about that generally. And then we have to kind of negotiate our way to how we're going to make that work and how much money it's going to cost, because obviously that's a factor. And so what I always try to keep in mind when I'm working on those is A, that I can and should rely on the local expert in that conversation, because CFO serves a 58 county service area. So I'll be working sometimes in a county that I've never visited. And someone local will say, that is not going to work that way. And I have to trust that local expert to tell me what I don't know because I'm not there. I think that's relevant, and having some faith in some people is important. But I also think that being really unwilling to give up on the vision is really important and can sometimes be really challenging, because sometimes when we're really knee deep, particularly with regard to projects that are related to poverty, because poverty is such a very complicated problem to solve, we can kind of lose track of where we're supposed to end up. And I think that's a really important piece. But then, so I also own a small family business, and it is in a very male dominated field. And my family has been in this small family business, fireworks. My family sells fireworks. This is a weird fact about me. And I am in charge of lots of things that are generally done by men in that business. And I sort of have come up with the most loving way to say, no, you cannot ask my husband about this. I'm your gal. This is it. You're talking to me. There's no other option. And I used to be so sensitive and frustrated about that, particularly when I was younger. I'd be like, oh my gosh, because it would just fill me with rage. But now I've come to the place where I can just sort of lovingly and super firmly say, nope, I'm the person that's doing this, and you can work with me or you can work with nobody. We're done here. And that's been sort of finding that delicate balance between rage and not getting what I need is sometimes a little challenging. But that is very different from my day-to-day work, because my day-to-day work is very nurturing. It's very community-based. I'm always working with people who really care, and they just have differences of opinion about how to get to a great solution. So I get a little bit of both in my life.
Great. Thank you for sharing. And I want to remind all of our participants out there, if you have questions, there's a Q&A function that you can ask those questions, and we've got some time at the end that we'll be addressing those. So next, we're going to talk about personal branding, this whole process of marketing your strengths, your assets, the value you bring to an organization. And we'll start with Amanda this time. What tools do you use to market your abilities and talents and the value you bring to Husch Blackwell?
Well, I have a little bit of an unfair advantage on this one, and branding. We have a whole team, marketing team, that helps put together our LinkedIn profiles and works on our biographies. And you have to take ownership of that and make sure they're representing you in the right light and what you want. And nobody knows what you do better than yourself. So you have to work with them. But part of it is taking advantage of the resources. They also help us get in front of the right audiences at different times. Part of it is networking and getting to know people so that you get picked to be on, you get asked to be on panels like this as well. But I think the biggest tool, and it's more of a skill that I'd say people need to do before they even start trying to market themselves, is figure out what your personal brand is. And I talk to a lot of people, and it gets very scattered, or they look at somebody and say, well, I want to be like XYZ. And for me, it would have been very easy to say, I want to be just like Virginia Fry. That would have been super easy because she was a wonderful lady who did a lot of great things. But the thing is, I can't be Virginia. I can only be Amanda. And so figuring out those traits of her, the things that I want to emulate but make my own, and whether it's, or Dave Agee, I'm not going to be those people that were my mentors or my sponsors, or even somebody on TV that you see that has something you like. So for me, it's trying to figure out those things that other people do that I want to emulate, but make it authentic to myself, and figuring out what that is. And then and then figuring out, and I get the help of other people, how to convey that. Mm-hmm. Because I can just be me.
Right. Right. Thank you so much for that. We'll go to our marketing specialist now, our guru in marketing. And Amanda had mentioned she has a team that helps with her LinkedIn profile. And when I started consulting, I worked with a gentleman in Kansas City. And when he put it together, I thought, ooh, that sounds really braggy. And he said, you've got to get over that. So what are some of the tools that you use that you feel are really important to personal branding?
Well, what I'd like to say, first of all, is personal branding might sound really overwhelming. You may like, oh my gosh, but also known as reputation. And your reputation is it follows you. It can be on your kid's soccer field. It can be at a fundraiser that you're at. it is really, to Amanda's point, you know, what I've always said in my personal and my professional life, in my service work and in my real work, I like to dig into things that I want to think about in my off time, where I'm passionate. It's not just a situation where I want a name on my name on the roster of that board. Like, it's an area where I really want to dig in and make a difference. And I think that when people see you in your authentic self, affecting change, that becomes part of your reputation. That becomes part of your personal brand. And so there are a variety of different areas from a service standpoint that I really felt passionate about committing my time. And I think that communicates, those people that you interact with in those environments. Same in your work environment. It's always good to do a 360 review with the people that you work with and say, how are you seeing me? And I think that is eye-opening in terms of your reviews. I also say, Google yourself. What comes up? What comes up in social media? What comes up when people are searching for you? Because that is a lot of times what other people will do, is they go, oh, I'm going to be meeting with Jan. Let me search her. What comes up? I want to know more about her. So that's something that everybody should think about as well. And to your point, with LinkedIn, from a business standpoint, it is important, and it can be uncomfortable to ask someone to write a comment about working with you, but it's kind of the nature, especially in the virtual space, you know, of how people are doing their research, and it's the representation of you. So I think about what you love to do, lean into that, and know that your reputation is both personal and professional, and it's the summation of those things, those experiences.
Very good. So as I'm working with young people starting their careers, one of the pieces of advice I give them is to go to all their social media tools that they utilize and really clean that up. I think even later in our career, sometimes there may be posts out there that if we had a competitor or a prospect look at that, we might question that. Any thoughts or ideas, Jan, on social media such as Facebook, Instagram, things that, tips that you have for all of us?
Well, you know, some of the things, even with our physicians, they will ask, like, how do I market myself? And what we will say is, be your authentic self on Facebook, on Instagram. Know that there are lots of eyes, especially if you have those things open. There are different filters, ways that you can utilize Instagram and Facebook where either people can follow you openly or they have to ask. But that's where you can share that space, where you can tell the story. Facebook is more around community. That's where people develop communities. And it's been interesting, we did a Branson Moms group trying to understand what the sentiment was around the Cox Health experience. And there was a lot of discussion with moms around what we do is we vet physicians, we vet experiences in our moms groups on Facebook. And so that's where community is formed. So you think about, those are the kinds of stories, that's the way that we connect there. Instagram, for example, is more a visual story, and that, again, goes back to who you follow, how they follow you, hashtags, et cetera. But I think a lot of times when you're thinking about how you tell a story about yourself, Facebook is still kind of the go-to place for community. So that's what I would share in that. And again, back to your point, social media follows you, and so those things don't go away. And it's an important story to share with high school and college students. I know that when I worked at Drury, that was one of the things that we did a lot with business school students, is that we gave them a free headshot so that they could develop their formal LinkedIn profile, and we did the same thing. There was social media conversations that they did with the business center to say, you need to make sure that when a potential employer looks in those spaces, that they see the reputation, the personal brand that you want to convey. And so it's time to clean that up. And so just remember, what goes out in that social space, it lives there a long time.
Right. Thank you very much. This next question is for Bridget, and we know that problem solving and decision making are critical to career success, no matter what your role is in an organization or the level that you participate in that organization. The business environment changes rapidly with our COVID crisis in the last couple of months. We've seen that with businesses having to make quick decisions, be extremely flexible, be creative, and some have done that better than others. How do you identify problems in your role at the Community Foundation? What decisions have to be made? What do you go through? What tools do you utilize to make effective, timely decisions?
Well, COVID has been an interesting experience at the Community Foundation for lots of reasons, one of which being that we were midway through our regular grant process when COVID hit, and so we had to change and rework grant programs that were mid-process in order to address COVID. So COVID is its own separate special adventure that is outside of the normal way that we would normally run grant making. It became an effort between my boss, Brian Fogel, who many of you know is a wonderful person and is very engaged in the community. It was an effort between Brian and I to find money. So that became a little bit outside of my normal realm of work. But in a normal situation where we're working to build a grant program based on what we perceive as a community need, it's a lot of listening. And I'll be honest, I'm not always the world's best listener. And so it's an effort to remember to always listen and to not filter that listening with my own opinions, if that makes sense. So for example, a few years ago, CFO, we really knew that we wanted to help and engage in diversity, equity, and inclusion work in the Ozarks. We had been doing that kind of grant making work informally. There were always grants within our grant rounds that focused on that work, but we had never separated out funding for that specific effort. And this is a thing I'm really passionate about and have always cared a lot about, but I can't just go and say, all right, well, this is a thing I care about, so we're going to make a grant round for it. What we did was we listened to community leaders, we engaged individuals working in fields related to equity. We talked to larger nonprofits that wanted to get into providing some work in the equity field, and we talked to them about what would be helpful to them. If we provided a grant program, what was it that they would need from that grant program? And so that's how we developed the diversity and inclusion grant round. And that grant round is going to be, we completed the second year this fall. We'll have it in the third year this coming fall. Each year we've committed more funding to that effort because not only did we learn, we learned along the way too. We learned that there isn't enough money for issues related to equity in the Ozarks, just not enough grant making money. We also learned that agencies that work in those fields struggle with capacity and need support. And so we have learned that it's important that we provide that support in a helpful way that ensures those agencies get stronger and more effective. So we've kind of changed it a little bit over time, and then it's going to go into a third round of slight changes to make it more honed and more right for what our community needs. But that's all really just based on a sort of a deep understanding of listening, like listening to people who are working in those fields and getting their expert opinions and then using that information to make decisions.
I think your point about listening is so critical. A lot of people that make decisions don't take into account the opinions of others. They've got this tunnel vision of what they feel that decision needs to be. Amanda or Jan, other thoughts about decision-making, problem solving from your experiences?
Happy to chime in, but Amanda, you want to go first?
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, from a marketing standpoint, what I always think is, well, first of all, marketing is common sense, and I think that from a marketing standpoint, we always think about how do you facilitate, how do you streamline the consumer experience? And what we've been saying recently is retail is getting healthcare faster than healthcare is getting retail, and we're actually learning from the retail space in terms of how people want to transact, have a relationship with healthcare. And so really what I'm always doing is looking at it through the consumer lens, and we do that through focus groups and surveys. We go to major employer groups and say, what would you think about this? We co-create with our customers to say, what are the gaps? What are you missing? You know, if you think about it, people say, hey, listen, if my hairdresser can send me an appointment reminder via text and I can have that interaction with, why can't I do that in the healthcare space? Why can't I do more from my mobile phone? You know, why can't I have more of a virtual experience because I don't want to bring my child in to an urgent care when they broke their finger and it's flu season. So how can you help me keep, you know, my family healthy and safe? So you're always needing to look at, so problem solving is really around looking at streamlining the consumer and patient experience, looking at other industries. You can always learn from other industries in terms of how they've problem solved, and then translate that into what does that look like in the healthcare space. So we have an innovation team that we work on, and it's multidisciplinary, and it's so important to be able to look at what's happening in the clinical space. You can't just look at something and say, oh, well, that needs to be done this way, because you need to understand what the implications are in terms of process and procedure as it relates to executing that in the clinical space. So being able to bring together a multidisciplinary team to be able to problem solve is always really important, especially in something as complex as healthcare. But always through the consumer lens is really my goal and my objective, and think about how do you streamline that? How do you make it easier? How do you make it how do you remove the obstacles? So that's kind of my goal in healthcare.
Very good. Amanda, anything to add?
Yeah, just say I come at problem solving probably from a bit of a different perspective, because a lot of times I'm not the decision maker. We try to, in my role, what we're trying to do is get somebody enough information, back to that research we were talking about earlier, but get someone enough information that they understand the risks, the rewards, the issues, the complexities around a decision, simplify it, distill it down, so it's easy to digest, because people like to get to people like Gina and Bridget, who also don't have a lot of time to read, 20-page legal memoranda, and get it distilled down. One of the biggest things for me, though, at times there's been this shift in legal services where people are like, only one attorney working on it because we don't want to pay for more. And I always feel like, A, that's going to take longer, and you're not going to get those same work product. And it goes back to, we've talked about different things, but the more perspectives we have, if I can sit down and talk to one person for a minute, we sort of hash out what's going on, what are the possible solutions to the problem, and then we write it, and we get an email and bullet point list and get it out, and then somebody can make a more informed decision knowing what's going on. So we're able to provide some of the background to help people make decisions, but it's really getting them that good information and different perspectives from different people. I might come up with a different idea than a colleague, and they could be, the really good idea could come from the second year associate, because they're not tainted with all the stuff that I've had for the past 14 years going on. So they come up with a really novel type idea.
Very good, thank you. So we're going to wrap it up talking about networking, and then we're going to take some questions and address some questions from our panelists. We know that networking can impact our career, as well as the ability to build relationships, whether those relationships are with colleagues or prospects to our organizations. What tips do you have for networking, and are there any organizations that you're a member of that helps you in your networking efforts? So let's start with Jan this time.
Yes, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Leadership Springfield. That was a great networking tool for me, and I see a lot of head nods there in terms of people experiencing the same thing. I met so many great folks in so many different industries that I might not have had the opportunity to meet otherwise, and it really helps build a sense of community. When you know someone from the watershed organization or an architecture firm, and you think, wow, it opens your eyes to a community that you thought you knew, and then you learn more about it than you had ever even imagined, and you appreciate the community more than ever. So that's been a great networking and also just collaboration, professional development tool that I found of great value. Also, we've talked about and I think Amanda and Bridget will probably touch on this. Sometimes when people say networking, you're kind of like, I consider myself a connector, and there is a little bit of a nuanced difference there. I find myself more fulfilled when someone asks me a question around, hey, do you know somebody who could help me with this? And I like to help people facilitate the meeting of folks to solve problems. And I think, you could call that networking, but I feel like it's helping people solve problems. And I enjoy that. So I, in many ways, would consider myself more of a connector. I'm a reluctant networker.
Very good. Thank you. How about Bridget? What about your networking tools that you use?
Well, it's funny, Jan, that you said that in Leadership Springfield, you might meet an architect and someone at Watershed Committee. I had one of each of those in my Leadership Springfield class. So there you go. I was in class 29. We were the best. So the Leadership Springfield was a good example of one that really worked for me, because I do not enjoy sort of glad handing, surface level stuff. I'm just not very good at it, and I don't enjoy it. But I do really enjoy getting to know people and figuring out sort of what they're passionate about, and making sure that they're connected with other people who are also passionate about that work, and sort of expanding my knowledge of various organizations in town, because it helps me with my job. So you don't have to be, I always think of my friend Daniel Oganyami, who is, he's recently moved to Burrell, but he is the best networker ever, and he makes everyone feel super comfortable, and he loves to meet people, and by the time he leaves a building, he knows every person that's in the building. That's not really my jam, that's not really my thing, but we can both be successful. You don't have to be the most extrovert and to be good at it. I think the point is to find a good connection, have that meaningful connection, remember that person down the road when you have a challenge and you need an expert opinion on that subject matter, or you meet someone else who needs help from that. A great example would be that Don Harkey and I were in Leadership Springfield together, and we don't have a ton in common with regard to our jobs necessarily, but we have found ways to work together because we know and respect one another, and we got to know each other really well with Leadership Springfield. I think it's just, for me, it's about building a deeper connection than it is about meeting a bunch of people. So if it's a networking event and it's, well, this isn't a world where we get to do this again, but it's cocktails and hanging out somewhere, look for a few people that you'd like to have a meaningful interaction with and focus on those people. And don't be looking around the room the whole time you're talking to them. Focus on them, spend time looking at them, having a meaningful connection with them. And then, it's fine to move on to another person, but don't be constantly looking for someone else to talk to. Talk to the person you're talking to, have a meaningful interaction, and then, learn from that and gain something from that.
Bridget, I can really connect to that. Years ago, I had someone tell me, if you can make one meaningful connection at an event, then you've been successful that evening. So thank you for sharing that, because I know lots of people that are very uncomfortable going, and just it's overwhelming to think about, talking to 50 people at that event. So thank you for sharing that. And we'll wrap it up with Amanda. Your thoughts on networking?
I would say I share similar views as the people that spoke before me, as Gina and Bridget. One thing, I think part of this question, they talked about local organizations that are good for networking. And there are a ton of good organizations. I mean, for women, Rachel spoke about Rosie. There are definitely Chamber. We've talked about Leadership Springfield. And so there's all those great networks, but I'd also just encourage you, anytime you're on a board, this seems really weird, you're at church, any place, just be yourself and make those connections that we talked about. And you're in effect networking, and you'll be surprised at when you'll have the chance to connect to people. And sometimes that's more meaningful than anything else, as Jan said, being that connector. And then when you need something, there's, somebody else is out there. Sort of doing a good deed for somebody else. A lot of times, A, it's more fulfilling for you, and B, sometimes it even reaps more benefits than you'll ever imagine it would. You don't always know how it does that. You might not always see it, but, sitting on boards in Springfield has a plethora of great organizations. You know, some of the best networking I was able to do was on boards, because you're meeting with them. You have that authentic, meaningful experience with somebody over and over again. You know, if you serve on the same board for 6 years, I was over at Harmony House for 6 years during when they moved over to the new location, and we went through a lot in that 6 years. And so some of those relationships, you know, I'm on a new board with one of those people. I got connected to a new board because of that relationship. And so you'll see how those things just sort of multiply. And it's the same in your career, and find those places that you want to be, whether it's, are you wanting to meet people that are your similar age group and doing the same things because you want a shared experience? Are you looking to meet people to develop business? What is it looking for? And then figure out, you can sort of target where you're networking as well. Above those, for me, I like those things that sort of make you feel good. I do my job and I love what I do, but then I want to give back and do stuff outside as well. So look for those different places and what you're looking for at any given time.
Okay, thank you very much. You know, I have to share one organization, and I agree, board work is really important and we get a lot from it ourselves, but it's also learning opportunities. And an organization that was an incredible influence on me was the Junior League of Springfield. And if you've ever served on a board with junior leaguers, you know, someone said those are the most organized, most effective, most efficient board members that I've ever worked with. So I would just put a word out there for the Junior League. If you're looking to learn to be a community volunteer, a leader, even the skills that I took away from that in business were incredible. So I'll put a plug out there for the Junior League as well. So at this point, we've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to get to some of the questions that we have from some of our participants this morning. And I'll start with this one. Can you discuss your thoughts on applying for a position that you may not be 100% qualified for, but you have the confidence in your abilities to learn the position? And I'll just kick off the discussion on that one, since that's something near and dear to my heart and what I do in my role pretty frequently. And I think the most important thing as you are applying for those positions, to think about competencies and experiences that you bring to the table. And it's all about transferable skills. And so if you think about competencies, whether it's decision-making, sales, networking, leadership, you want to tell a story and help that interviewer to see your past experiences and how that's going to apply to the position that you're applying for. And when I hear someone share that story, that is the ability, if I've got 2 or 3 questions around decision making and it's totally unrelated to this position, but I can see how that individual would be transferring those decision making skills into the role that I am trying to fill in my organization, I have more trust and confidence that this individual who may not have experience in this position, how they're going to bring those decision-making skills into this new role. I'll open it up for our panelists as well. Thoughts or ideas around that, Bridget? Oh, yeah, I thought maybe that was your hand going up.
No, it was my hand going up.
Okay.
So when I have hired, and Karen helps us with hiring, so plug for Alice, we do behavioral-based interviewing, and that has really helped me, because a lot of times we're hiring for positions that are really unique, because CFO, grant making, this is a really unique field of work for which there's not like some super tidy degree that you can get at Missouri State and get a job at CFO. And CFO is definitely, we have staff who have, Caitlin in our office has an arts administration degree. So what we're looking for are sort of behaviors in the past. And I also think it's really relevant, and have certainly picked up on when I'm interviewing someone and they talk about something in their work that relates to the job. And then I get a sense of kind of what else was going on in their lives at that time, because for me, ability to deal with sort of multiple projects at the same time isn't always about work. Sometimes it's about personal life, and the ability to manage both of those things. I think that's really relevant, and I definitely look for that when I'm interviewing, but I definitely don't only select candidates for interviews that have a specific degree. That is not something that I do. I look at sort of what they've been doing, whether or not that has similar skill sets to the job that I'm hiring for. And then I get them in there and I talk to them about sort of their experiences in the past and whether or not that was relevant to the work that they could be doing at CFO. Because like I said, there's nothing that like tidily translates from a college degree or from a previous job into foundation grant making. I mean, there are only a few people in the whole city that do that work. So it's really about ability to learn skill sets and sort of ability to, I like to look for people who have learned on the job things. And I also like to look for people who have in the past been in a position and then risen up into a different position within that company. Because to me, that indicated that they were able to learn a whole new job while they were in another job. And I think that that is helpful too. So those are just some things that I look for.
Thank you, Bridget. Jan or Amanda, anything to add?
I was just going to say, when the minute I heard the question, I'm like, transferable skills. There's been so many times where I have seriously considered and then also hired individuals who didn't have experience specifically in account management, say. I mean, obviously, graphic design, you got to be a graphic designer, but there are other things where you can say they can learn that, and you look for the skills, the attitude, the customer service, all those types of things. And I was going to say, it's kind of neat. We have this program called VIP Candidate, and there's this card that we have, and I keep it in my wallet. And what we look for, HR started it, and they said anytime you interact with someone where you feel like they gave you best-in-class customer service, hand them a card and tell them you'd like for them to work at Cox Health. I was in an Uber, and the gentleman who picked me up, super nice, super professional, and we started talking, and he was saying that he was, looking to do some other things. He wanted to kind of change his career. I handed him a card, and he actually interviewed at Cox Health. So, you're looking for those people who have the attitude and in the basic toolbox, and then there are certain things that they can learn. So just know that transferable skills will take. We're all in those industries. Who knew all the things that are going to change even as a result of COVID, right?
Right.
That people are always reinventing themselves, and we have to think about how we stay relevant. And that's part of taking that toolbox and saying, this is how we can translate it to this industry, to this job. We're all going to have to be in that business, for the coming years.
Okay. I've got another question here that I think is really interesting, and it says you've discussed the plethora of activities in which you're involved. What type of self-care do you do to not get burnt out? And in the middle of COVID, I'm all about this one. I'm isolated. I'm still working from home. I have very little contact. Man, I want to hear about this one. So, Amanda, you want to kick us off with this one?
Yeah, I'm really bad at it. So we're going to start with that. I'm actually back in my office for the first day. We wear masks in when you're not sitting. I'm lucky I have a door and can shut it, so it's not much different than being at home. I'm still pretty isolated. Trying to do something, I really try, especially in the summertime, I'm a lot better at it. I'm fortunate enough that my family, we go to the lake. That's a big thing around here. I'm probably not the only one. If it's not too hot, I will leave my cell phone in my truck while we're out on the boat. I cut off for, it's probably 5 hours. Sometimes it feels, but my job doesn't stop because it's after 5 o'clock or because it's on Saturday or Sunday. So there are just those times. It would be really easy to get caught up with what's going on. So I try at least once a week to have a block of time where I am focused on my 2 little boys and my husband or our friends, and I'm not focused. I don't allow work to intrude into that. Sometimes it happens better than others. I also try to take one vacation a year where I am pretty much off the grid. Mine got canceled this year. We were supposed to be on a Disney cruise that in May that clearly we didn't go. So I'm jonesing for that just a bit. In previous years, we've gone camping and different things in national parks, but really just trying to dedicate some time at some point to that.
Okay, thank you. Well, I only got just a few more minutes. Bridget, do you have anything that you'd like to share?
So I'll admit that I'm semi-bad at this, and COVID has made me worse at it, if that makes sense. I have a 5-year-old who is in the other room right over there, who I left with the iPad and said, please don't bother me. This has just been exactly how it's been for 3 months. So every day is this constant juggling of everything. And now that my laptop is at home on my kitchen table, I am so bad about opening it back up after my son goes to bed and working through until it's time to crash into bed. So I'm probably a terrible example currently. In general, I really love to read. And so for me, self-care is taking time to read. And so I, in a previous non-COVID world, would go to the library every 3 weeks on the dot. And I use a lunch break to go up to the Midtown Library and I pick out some books. And I do consistently try to take a lunch break, which is something that it can be challenging. I try to take a lunch break, and I use the lunch break to eat some food and do a little reading of something fun. I don't read very many serious things. And for me, that really helps reset. When I skip lunch and then sit at my desk and work until 10 p.m., I am off the next day. I'm really off the next day. And so I may think that I'm getting ahead, but I often am not really, because I end up being really frazzled the next day and am less effective. So that's been a really hard lesson for me, because the workload has been really significant since March. But I am sort of finding my way, and I am finding that you just can't keep going forever, because you'll burn out and you will have been ineffective with it. So.
Right. Thank you for sharing. Jan, anything in about 30 seconds you can share? Words of wisdom.
Yeah, well, mine is exercise, just to get outside and walk or ride my bike. But and again, just trying to make sure you got to be your own best advocate, right? So you need to make sure that as you're able, you can still be highly effective and probably more effective if you take some breaks and really do focus on personal care at appropriate times.
Thank you. Well, I want to wrap it up by thanking all of our panelists this morning. Again, thank you, Bridget and Amanda and Jan. Learned a lot this morning. Really appreciate your time. I want to thank Missouri Cures and Rosie for hosting us this morning, and also all of our participants that joined us. I hope you'll join us next year, and hopefully we will see you in person next year. So again, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. Bye-bye.